Hello, Chris.
Hello.
Okay, so you're going to be under arrest now, okay? So the time is 8:31 p.m. and you're under arrest on suspicion of allowing or causing the death of a vulnerable adult, okay? So the circumstances are that we've come to the address that you were in earlier on, and we've gone into the back room and found a lady in the freezer, okay? So you do not say anything very many on your defence if you do not mention one question on something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Do you understand?
I understand.
Have you got any response to that?
No.
On February 17th, 2026, two officers from South Wales Police drove to a quiet street in the seaside town of Porthcawl. The street is called Poplar Crescent. Rows of small, semi-detached houses, front gardens. Nothing unusual about any of it. They were there for a welfare check. A local medical practice had asked them to go. One of their patients, an 89-year-old woman named Sylvia Phillips, was still on the books. Her prescriptions were still being collected every month, but no doctor, no nurse, no member of staff had actually laid eyes on her since September of 2022. 3.5 years of paperwork. Zero human contact. The man who opened the door was her son, Christopher Phillips, 60 years old. Gray hair, glasses, quiet. He told the officers his mother had moved to London and was staying with relatives. They asked for an address. He didn't have one. They asked for a phone number. He didn't have one. They asked him to name a single relative she was staying with. He couldn't. So they searched the house, and in a downstairs room they found a large chest freezer with flowers arranged neatly on the lid. Sylvia Phillips was inside it. She had been dead for almost 3 years, and during those 3 years, £78,190.92 had been paid into her bank account. That's around $105,000 US. This is the story of how a woman disappeared inside her own home, in plain sight of a doctor's office, a benefits agency, a local council, and an entire street of neighbors, and how it took 3.5 years for a single person to knock on that door and ask a hard question. If you want more investigations built strictly from court records and verified reporting, take a second and hit subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel reach people who care about cases like this one. Now, let's go back to the beginning. To understand what happened on Poplar Crescent, you have to understand how small the world inside that house had become. Christopher Phillips was not Sylvia Phillips's biological son. Merthyr Tydfil Crown Court heard that she adopted him when he was 2 years old. From that point on, they lived together. Not for a few years. Not through his childhood. For roughly 50 years. He grew up in that house. He became an adult in that house. He worked for a period as a company director. And he kept living in that house. In 2008, as his mother aged, he took on the role of her main carer. That's the British term for a family caregiver, someone providing unpaid full-time support to a relative. For the next 14 years, that was his life. Then, in late 2022, her health declined further. Christopher Phillips resigned from his job entirely to look after her full-time. The court described the two of them as, quote, somewhat isolated. That description was backed up by the people who lived closest to them. After the case broke, neighbors on Poplar Crescent spoke to reporters. One resident said they had lived on that street for 10 years and had seen Christopher Phillips only a handful of times. That same resident said they hadn't even known an elderly woman was supposed to be living at the property. Another neighbor said that when they moved onto the street, they were told the old lady in that house was agoraphobic, that she had a fear of leaving her home, that she simply would not be seen outside. That neighbor could not say where the explanation had originally come from, or how widely it was believed. Now, here is where this case gets genuinely important, because Sylvia Phillips was not invisible to the health system. Not at first. The court was given her contact record with her local GP practice. That's the general practitioner, the equivalent of a primary care doctor's office in the United States. In 2021, Sylvia Phillips attended 26 appointments at that practice. 26. That is roughly 1 every 2 weeks. That is an elderly woman under active, continuous medical management. In 2022, she attended 6, 26 down to 6. And then the record simply stops. The last time Sylvia Phillips was seen by medical professionals was September 24th, 2022, in an accident and emergency department. That's the British equivalent of an ER visit. 2 days later, on September 26th, 2022, her own GP made a house call to Poplar Crescent. That was the final confirmed contact any medical professional had with her while she was alive. After that, the practice kept trying. They invited her in for a review. Her son told them she would not be coming to the surgery. He told them she didn't need the blood tests. They made repeated attempts to reach her. The court heard they were denied access by her son. And every month, the prescriptions kept going out. And every month, her son kept picking them up. Think about that gap for a second. From September 2022 onward, the practice had a patient on their list who was receiving medication, but who no one had physically examined. And the only channel of information about her condition was one man standing at the counter, saying she was fine, saying she didn't want to come in. Sylvia Phillips died at home on Poplar Crescent on March 8th, 2023. She was 89 years old. Nobody outside that house was told. No ambulance was called. No death certificate was issued. No funeral director was contacted. No death was registered with the authorities. The court heard what happened the day after she died. Christopher Phillips held his mother in his arms and told her he would look after her. That is what his own defense told the court, drawn from what he later said to a psychiatrist. 2 days after her death, on March 10th, 2023, he went online and bought a chest freezer from the retailer AO.com. It was delivered to the house. He put it in a downstairs room, and he placed his mother's body inside it. Some reports of the case describe that room as the living room. Others describe it as the dining room. What is not in dispute is that the freezer was on the ground floor of the home, in the main living space, and that Sylvia Phillips remained inside it for the next 35 months. Not in a garage, not in a shed, not in a basement, in the room where he lived. The court heard that he later moved downstairs to sleep in that same room, so he could stay close to her. At times, he would open the freezer and hold her hand, and he talked to her. His defense attorney, Ruth Smith, told the court he described talking to his mother as though she were still alive, sitting beside her, talking about television programs, talking about the soap opera Coronation Street, talking about the horse racing, exactly the way they always had. Now, at this point in the story, most people are already forming a judgment, and I want to hold off on that for a moment, because the second half of what he did looks nothing like the first half. Because while all of that was happening inside the house, something very different was happening at the bank. Sylvia Phillips' income never stopped. The money kept arriving, month after month, payment after payment, and her son kept access to it. The exact figure calculated by investigators and put before the court is £78,190.92. That total came from 6 separate income streams. Number 1, her state pension. The basic government retirement payment. Number 2, pension credit. An additional top-up payment for low-income retirees. Number 3, attendance allowance. This one matters. Attendance allowance is a benefit paid specifically to disabled or elderly people who need help with personal care. It exists because that person is alive and needs looking after. Number 4, winter fuel payments, a seasonal payment to help older people heat their homes. Number 5, cost of living payments, government support issued during the inflation crisis of 2022 and 2023. And number 6, housing benefit, assistance with rent and housing costs. The first 5 were paid by the Department for Work. And pensions, the UK government agency that administers benefits and pensions. The 6th was paid by Bridgend County Borough Council, the local authority. Every single one of those payments would have stopped immediately if her death had been reported. None of them stopped, because nobody reported it. And that is the second half of this case. not the grief. The 35 consecutive months of not filling out a form. If you're finding this case as difficult to categorize as I am, hit that subscribe button. This channel goes deep on cases where the evidence points two ways at once, and I'd like you along for the rest of them. Let's get to the day it all came apart. February 17th, 2026. The medical practice had finally escalated it. Staff had grown increasingly concerned about a patient nobody had spoken to directly in years, and they contacted South Wales Police and requested a welfare check. Officers went to the house on Poplar Crescent that day. South Wales Police said officers attended the address shortly before 7 in the evening. Christopher Phillips answered the door. He told them his mother was alive. He said she had gone to London and was staying with relatives. The officers asked him for details. He could not provide an address. He could not provide a telephone number. He could not provide information about the family members she was supposedly staying with. The court heard he also told police she did not want to undergo medical tests, the same line the practice had been given for years. But the officers were now watching him, not just listening to him. The court heard he was trembling, fidgeting. His answers and his demeanor made them suspicious. Then he went upstairs, and while he was up there, officers overheard him on the phone. The court heard him say that the police were going to arrest him and, quote, "You've got the will." That single overheard sentence changes the temperature of this whole encounter, because a man who is simply lost in grief, who has genuinely convinced himself his mother is still alive, does not think about a will. Officers searched the property. In the downstairs room, they found the chest freezer. Flowers had been placed on top of it. They opened it. Sylvia Phillips had been wrapped in bedding and covered with a leopard print silk blanket. Yellow and pink roses had been laid with her, and there was a birthday card. The card read, "To Mum from Christopher and Tina." Tina was the family dog. Christopher Phillips was arrested at the scene, initially on suspicion of preventing a lawful burial. He was taken into custody and interviewed. He answered no comment to every single question. That meant investigators could not build this case on admissions. They had to build it entirely on records. And that is exactly what they did. The investigation, led by Detective Chief Inspector Claire Lamerton of South Wales Police, worked with the Department for Work and Pensions and with Bridgend County Borough Council to reconstruct every payment made into Sylvia Phillips's account from March 8, 2023 onward. They pulled the banking activity. They pulled the prescription collection history. They pulled the correspondence between Christopher Phillips and his mother's medical practice. Every time he had said she was fine, every time he had said she didn't need tests, every time he had blocked a visit. 3 days after the discovery, on the Friday, he appeared at Cardiff Magistrates' Court, charged with preventing a lawful and decent burial and with fraud by false representation. During that short hearing, he spoke only to confirm his name, his date of birth, and his address. He was remanded in custody. No bail. He was sent to the Crown Court, and he stayed behind bars from that day forward. On March 20th, 2026, he pleaded guilty. He entered those pleas at the earliest realistic opportunity, which becomes significant later. There is one piece of evidence in this case that investigators never got, and it is the most important one. When officers opened that freezer, Sylvia Phillips was completely frozen. Because of that, a considerable amount of time had to pass before a post-mortem examination could be carried out at all. When the examination was finally completed, the pathologist was unable to establish a cause of death. That is the finding. Not undetermined pending tests. Not inconclusive for now. The pathologist could not say how Sylvia Phillips died. Police have stated that the circumstances of her death were not thought to be suspicious, and it is important to be precise about what that means. No one has been charged in connection with how Sylvia Phillips died. No court has made any finding that any person caused her death. Christopher Phillips was never accused of it. Every offense he admitted concerns what happened after March 8, 2023. Not what happened on it. But the plain fact remains. An 89-year-old woman died at home, unattended, with no doctor present and no medical certification, and the physical evidence that would normally answer the question of how she died sat in a freezer for 35 months. A coroner's inquest will be held. In the British system, an inquest is a public fact-finding hearing held by a coroner into deaths that are sudden, unexplained, or unnatural. Its job is to establish who died and where, when, and how. Whether that inquest can establish anything the pathologist could not is an open question. So what, exactly, was he convicted of? These are British charges, so let me lay them out clearly. The first charge is preventing the lawful and decent burial of a dead body. This is not a modern statute. It is a common law offence in England and Wales, and it exists for a very specific reason. Society has a legal interest in the dead being properly and decently disposed of. That interest does not belong to the family alone. When a person dies, the state has a right to know, to record it, and to ensure the body is treated properly. The second and third charges are 2 counts of fraud by false representation. Under the Fraud Act 2006, this offense covers dishonestly making a false representation, including by failing to correct an impression you know to be false, intending to make a gain for yourself. 1 count related to the Department for Work and Pensions. The other related to Bridgeon County Borough Council. The false representation in both cases was the same. His mother is alive. Keep paying. He pleaded guilty to all 3. Before sentencing, the court received a psychiatric report, and it produced a formal diagnosis. The psychiatrist concluded that at the time of the offending, Christopher Phillips was suffering from a recognized mental disorder, namely prolonged grief disorder. Prolonged grief disorder is a formally recognized diagnosis. It applies when grief becomes so severe and so persistent that it disables a person's ability to function. The report recorded specific findings: persistent longing for his mother, difficulty accepting her death, preoccupation with her, social withdrawal, an inability to move forward with ordinary life. It also recorded what it described as a dependent relationship between the 2 of them, together with his limited social contacts. His defense attorney, Ruth Smith, told the court he was a vulnerable individual. She said he was extremely close to his mother and in extreme grief after her death. She said he showed a lack of acceptance about her passing and had almost created a false narrative that she was still alive. She quoted what he had said to police. He said, "I basically didn't want to let her go." He also told doctors he wanted more time. Christopher Phillips sobbed in the dock as those details were read out. A separate probation report assessed him as posing a low risk of further offending and described the case as arising from an extremely unusual set of circumstances. The prosecutor, Alex Orndal, put the other side of it. He argued that Christopher Phillips had made a deliberate decision to keep receiving those payments rather than report the death and go back to work. And this is the real question at the center of the sentencing. Prolonged grief disorder can explain why a man cannot let go of his mother's body. It does not, by itself, explain 35 months of housing benefit. Sentencing took place on Monday, August 3, 2026, at Merthyr Tydfil Crown Court, before Judge Tracy Lloyd Clark, the Recorder of Cardiff. Her sentencing remarks worked through it point by point. She said he had deliberately concealed his mother's death and had taken steps to give the impression that she was still alive. She said that rather than notify the authorities and make arrangements for a lawful burial, he purchased a chest freezer on March 10th and concealed her body within it. She said he continued to collect her prescriptions and lied to medical professionals and eventually lied to the police. She said he had repeatedly told medical staff his mother did not wish to attend appointments or undergo tests. She said his mother's pension and benefits continued to be paid into her bank accounts, which he was able to access, and she addressed the dignity of it directly. She said that his mother had suffered the indignity of being stored in a chest freezer for 3 years, while noting that there were no other indignities following her death. On the diagnosis, she was careful. She accepted the psychiatric conclusion and said the disorder helped explain his actions. But she said it did not remove his responsibility for deliberately concealing the death and maintaining the deception over such a long period. She rejected the suggestion that the fraud had been sophisticated or extensively planned. This was not an elaborate scheme. There were no fake documents, no forged signatures, no complex financial structures. But she found medium culpability, and she explained exactly why. He bought the freezer. He kept collecting the prescriptions, and he repeatedly lied to stop the deception being discovered. Those were active steps, not passive silence. She identified the aggravating factors, the amount of money involved, the length of time the offending continued, and the cost to the National Health Service of the prescriptions collected in his mother's name. Medication issued, month after month, for a patient who had died. On mitigation, the court heard the money had not gone on a lavish lifestyle. His defense said there were no expensive holidays, no designer clothes, no visible change in how he lived. The court heard some of the money was used to clear credit card bills and household debts at the property. He had no previous convictions, no cautions, and no warnings. A clean record at 60 years old. The judge acknowledged there were real factors pointing toward suspending the sentence. His mental health, his lack of previous offending, and the low risk of him committing further offenses. Then she said the seriousness and the duration of the offending meant an immediate prison sentence was unavoidable. Here is the sentencing math, because it tells you what the court actually thought of this case. Had Christopher Phillips been convicted after a trial, the sentence would have been 3 years and 6 months. His guilty plea, entered at the earliest opportunity, reduced that by 1/3. That brought it to 2 years and 4 months in prison. He also received 8 months for one fraud count and 4 months for the other. Both of those run concurrently, meaning they are served at the same time as the main sentence, rather than added onto it. Under the current release rules applied in his case, he is expected to serve 40% of that sentence in custody before being released on license. Release on license is the British equivalent of supervised release. He serves the remainder in the community under conditions and can be recalled to prison if he breaks them. Time already spent on remand counts toward the sentence. He had been in custody since February, and the case is not finished. The court set out a timetable for confiscation proceedings. Under the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, the court can now examine what Christopher Phillips gained from his offending and order him to pay it back. That process will determine how much money or property can actually be recovered. Money that came from the Department for Work and Pensions and from Bridgend County Borough Council and ultimately from the public. Detective Chief Inspector Claire Lammerton, the senior investigating officer, said this was an extremely sad case in which Christopher Phillips concealed his own mother's death and profited financially over a significant period. She said her thoughts were with Sylvia's loved ones and that she hoped they had found some peace, having finally been able to properly lay her to rest. So, what is left unresolved? 3 things. The first is medical. We still do not know how Sylvia Phillips died. The pathologist could not establish it. Police do not believe the circumstances were suspicious. An inquest is still to come. But an 89-year-old woman died at home with no medical professional present, and the physical evidence spent 35 months in a freezer. The second is that overheard phone call. You've got the will. Nobody has publicly explained what that sentence meant, or what was in the will, or why it was the thing on his mind as officers stood in his house. It was reported to the court. It has never been resolved in public. And the third is the one I keep coming back to. Not a legal question, a systems question. A woman went from 26 medical appointments a year to 0. Her prescriptions kept being dispensed. 6 separate government payments kept flowing into her account from 2 different public bodies for 35 straight months. And she lived on a street where neighbors had been told a story that explained her absence so neatly that nobody ever questioned it. The medical practice is the only party in this entire story that eventually pushed hard enough to force the door open. They kept trying. They kept getting blocked. And in the end, they picked up the phone and called the police. That call is the reason we know what happened at all. So let me put 2 questions to you, and I want to hear where you land. First, the court accepted that Christopher Phillips had a genuine diagnosed mental disorder and still sent him to prison. Was 2 years and 4 months right? Too much? Not enough? Second, if a person can vanish for 3.5 years while still collecting 6 government payments and a monthly prescription, where exactly did the system fail? Was it the benefits agencies? The council? Or is there simply no mechanism designed to catch this? Drop your answer in the comments. Please keep it respectful. There is a real woman at the center of this, and she has a family. Here is what is confirmed. Sylvia Phillips died at her home in Porthcawl on March 8th, 2023, at the age of 89. Her death was never reported. 2 days later, her son bought a chest freezer and placed her body inside it, in a downstairs room of the house they had shared for around 50 years. For 35 months, he collected her prescriptions, told her doctors she did not want to be seen, and received £78,190 and 92 pence in payments made in her name. On February 17th, 2026, police carried out a welfare check requested by her doctor and found her. He pleaded guilty to preventing a lawful and decent burial and to 2 counts of fraud by false representation, and on August 3rd, 2026, he was sentenced to 2 years and 4 months in prison. Confiscation proceedings are ongoing. An inquest into Sylvia Phillips's death is still to be held. Her cause of death remains unestablished. If this is the kind of case you want covered properly, court records, verified facts, no invented dialogue, and no speculation, subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell. There is a new investigation every week, and the next one is already in production. I'll leave you with the detail from this case that I cannot get out of my head. When officers opened that freezer, there was a birthday card inside it. It was signed from Christopher and from the dog. In 3 years, nobody else ever had the chance to sign one.